Welcome back to RGR Football. I'm Ryan. This is me going rogue on your Kansas City Chiefs, as well as some of the NFL. Today's the day that we've been waiting for. It's been a really, really long off-road, off-season, off everything. And it comes down to this. Today is the 53-man roster projection that I'm going to do live for you on this. So I'm firing up screencast here, and we're going to walk through it together. If you're not subbed to the channel yet, make sure you do that. The sub, the like, the bell notification, and click that bell down to all if you're on your mobile so that you get all the notifications about all of our new content. Dan and I do film. I do a lot of in-depth roster building type analysis, and we have more things coming for you. It's going to be a great season, and it starts with the roster. So, without any more hubbub, here is what I think should happen, not necessarily if it will. We start with the Chiefs, and across the league, these are positions that generally are sought out and sorted out very early in camp, and those are the specialists. The Chiefs have three specialists that are unencumbered, to tell you the truth. James Winchester, Harrison Butker, and now Tommy Townsend. With the departure of Dustin Colquitt, and that is a little bit difficult to say because he's been such a stalwart in this organization. With his departure, these are the three. They are unencumbered. There are no backups. There are no competition going on. These are your three specialists. So we set those aside. Those are the guys that are not in question. That leaves us 50 to make this 53-man roster as we understand that it's coming down on cut down day. And we're going to start with the goods on the offensive side of the ball because, quite frankly, there just aren't that many question marks about what's going on the Chiefs' offense. There are a couple. We're going to get through them here. But this side of the ball is very much squared away. They are in the true run-it-back fashion, not trying to tinker, maybe just add a little bit here or there. They are not trying to recreate the wheel that won them a championship. And that really starts with the man at the top of the list, and that is your quarterback, Patrick Mahomes. I do believe he's going to have a backup in Chad Henne that the team likes. I actually prefer Matt Moore, I think, because I think their skill sets are very similar, and Matt Moore has proven that he can play this game in this offense under pressure without Patrick Mahomes with this same offense. So I'd rather see that. We'll talk about him coming up here in a bit. But here's the new logo for RGR. Hope you guys dig that. And we're going to put this because Patrick Mahomes is the linchpin. So he gets the RGR logo in our lineup. And then we get to the offensive line. And as we take a look at them, it's not much question at this point. After the opt-out of Lucas Niang, after the opt-out of LDT, this is what we're left with. And it has been pretty consistent through camp, except for a little bit of an injury here, in that your starters across the board are going to be Fisher, Osemele, Ryder, Wiley, and Schwartz. That's not much of a question. I opted to go with 9 offensive linemen because I feel like this is one where they might have to do a little bit of rigmarole. Fisher's had a concussion. Osemele's had a shoulder. You just have to figure it out and have enough bodies to go in there. If they ever get an exposure where COVID comes into the building, this is the group that is likely to get hit the hardest and first. So you want to have some extra guys in the room. So I went with Remmers, Allegretti, Kilgore, who is a new signee who hasn't actually practiced at the time of this recording, but I think he will be, and Sanat as the backups. And those are placed kind of strategically. I think Allegretti is the guy that they would like to see at center. I'm not sure if that's going to happen because Kilgore has experience there. I just think it's going to take him a little bit of time to get up to speed. I think both of those guys can play either of those positions. Remmers filled in for Fisher at left tackle when he had to miss a little bit of time, but he can also play everything but the center position along this line. And that brings me to the specialty positions. There are a large number of them. We're going to go through them because in the end, I went with 6 wide receivers. I think that's the most reasonable. I think that's what we should expect. And a lot of these are pretty no-nonsense. Hill and Robinson over at the Z, that's pretty arbitrary. All these wide receivers are trained to play all 3 receiver positions. So this is just me lining them up. This does not mean that I think Robinson should be playing the Z. I think he's actually better at the X. But everybody will move around and switch positions. So we know that we can just kind of sprinkle them on what their main role might be or where we're more comfortable with them. And for me, that's Robinson right now lining up behind Hill in the Z. Then Hardman obviously is your slot. I think he's going to eat there all season. I think that's a great spot for him. And I think Byron Pringle has underestimated speed, and he could actually go in there as well. I do think he is the 5. And that leaves us our starter on the other side in Watkins is a no-brainer. And I think because of special teams play, it comes down to Jody Fortson, who we'll talk about, and Marcus Kemp, who gets the nod as the 6th wide receiver on this roster. When we get to the tight ends, there is none better than Travis Kelce. He gets the top. Ricky Seals-Jones is brought in to be similar, to be able to split out, to be able to go all the way out to the wide receiver position and still be able to run routes effectively to get himself open. I think Ricky Seals-Jones actually reflects the most in going from Travis Kelce to anyone else is that he can do the most in that particular position. I think Nick Keiser's a great story. He's come on. I think that's great for him, but I don't think that he has the athleticism overall to be as close to Kelce as Ricky Seals-Jones is. So that's why those 3 are there. Then we get to the expectation at running back, and I do have them keeping 5. Obviously, we're going to go through that. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is the number 1. That doesn't mean that he's going to get the majority of the snaps as the season starts. I think that might be kind of a breaking in period over the first 3 or 4 games. Darrell Williams will back him up. Anthony Sherman is the only fullback and, quite frankly, one of the best blockers on the offense overall. Then you have DeAndre Washington and Darwin Thompson. I think because they went through some attrition last year, I think they're going to want to keep a couple extra guys. So I do think Washington and Thompson are both on the opening week 1 roster, and we'll see if they can manage that beyond. Now that brings me to you have to designate some guys. If you have to pull up from the practice squad for injury or for COVID. So that leaves us our group that I designate as the practice squad players, and that includes Elijah McGuire, who might be the last bright glass option at the running back position. Darrell Williams and Yas Durant as developmental guys that could eventually find their way onto the roster. And this is a really interesting triad right here between Williams, Durant, and Kilgore. Kilgore could actually start on the practice squad for the first week just because he hasn't gotten up to speed yet. I think you could sub in Williams if he overtakes Allegretti at some point. So this is a really fluid group here on the interior of the backups and practice squatters. Then I think Yelder showed enough that the team's going to like him. I think they're going to bring him back to the practice squad. And that leaves Fortson, who we spoke about earlier, who I really think if they had more special teams players on defense, I think Fortson would have made this roster. And maybe if it comes down to that question, and they just feel there's more upside on the offensive part than there is in the loss of Marcus Kemp and his special teams abilities, this could actually flip, and you could see Fortson on the 53-man week 1. Garrett Dieter behind him, I don't think he has any chance to overtake the other 2. And then as pure developmental guys, I like Lipscomb and Shelton Mosley as guys that can be contributors eventually, that need at least a year, and I think that's where they'll be. That brings us over to the defensive side of the ball, which has a number of questions. Right now, we have 3 specialists, 25 on the offense, and it just came down that I think it's actually going to boil down to a little bit of parity, a little balance on both sides. 25 offense, 25 defense, and the 3 specialists. We're going to start along the defensive front, and that is pretty ho-hum, except for the fact your starters are in pretty good shape. Oxofor missed a little bit of time, but he's coming back supposedly. Derek Notty's missed a little bit of time, but he's healing up. You have Jones and Clark. That is your standard foursome. Now, I list these as nose tackle and defensive tackle because the one shade is a difficult position. Technically, Notty's really the only guy on here without Mike Pennell, who will be suspended. We'll talk about him in a second, that would really be able to fill that role. So you may find them going to more of a NASCAR look when they get into the nickel. And I am going to do this original lineup as a nickel because that is the defense that they play the very most. So that's where we're going there. I feel like Tano Passanio and Taco Charlton are going to be the primary backups at end. That makes perfect sense to me. But they have a lot of ends, and I mean a lot. And a lot of guys that they like that have some abilities they'd like to share. Mike Dan is really intriguing. They seem to be very high on him. He came back from what was a pretty quick injury in training camp, and I feel like he's going to make this. And Damon Harris showed them something. He is the one guy that can really be called a speed rusher in this group. And I think that they want to have that as something to throw in for a change of pace. And I do think that he makes that. You also have to remember that Passanio, Charlton, and honestly, Dana, because he did it in college, can probably go inside and play on the interior a little bit. Not necessarily just a 3-tech, but definitely in the B gaps and try to attack them there. So they give you the flexibility that you have to get through with Mike Pennel out of order for the first 2 weeks. Now, Saunders is clearly the number 3, even with Mike Pennel in. Mike Pennel is a run-first defender. Colin Saunders has the ability, and quite frankly, I am looking for him to have a big season of a step forward where he can contribute on all downs. And at the end, you have to have 4 bodies at the interior line positions when you go into week 1. The Texans will try to run the ball some. You need to be able to stop that. And evidently, Wharton is the guy that's coming out of training camp that can maybe fill that role. I don't expect him to stick on the roster. I expect that when Mike Pennel returns, he will be the guy that is sent down. On the defensive side of the ball, the big plus goes right about there, and I'm sure you guys know who gets the RGR symbol on this lineup. It is Tyrann Mathieu. As the leader of the defense, he is exactly the person that should be marked as the big symbol on the defensive lineup. And like I said, we're going to do a nickel here because that's what the Chiefs want to play the most. And we'll start at the outside. Ward is firmly implanted as the left cornerback. I don't think they're going to want to travel in much. They want to kind of lock that down, let it be. You've heard a lot about Antonio Hamilton coming on, being able to play some corner, being able to play some nickel, being able to play some safety. At the end of the day, I don't think they want to have to use him unless they have to. And that would become, if it's more of a safety situation, because they have Rashad Fenton, who I think they really, really like. And if they're just playing 2, if they're in the base defense here, I think Rashad Fenton's probably the guy on the outside opposite Ward. But as soon as they go to the nickel, they want him inside. They like him as a nickel. And I think that's where he played well last year. Showed more than I expected, and they want him to come on. Now, that said, when they do that, I think right now, with Bashaud Breeland also suspended, it is going to be L'Jarius Sneed that starts at the right cornerback position. I think they're pushing him quite a bit, and I think he's up to the task. It may be rough going early. I will give you guys that because he is a rookie that is jumping up quite a ways in level of competition, but they seem to have faith in him, and they are pushing him. And I think Keys will line up behind him with Hamilton behind Ward, and that gives you your 5 corners for week 1. That will change once Bashaud Breeland comes back. We'll talk about him in a second. Now, over the linebacker spot, I think this is where the squeeze comes in. I think they're only going to keep 5. Technically, you could be tempted to keep 6, but I don't think the upside is there for the 6th position. So we're going to go with the Mike backer in the nickel, the guy that's calling the defense. That's going to be Hitchens for the most part. He will be the guy that never comes off the field this season. They will use him as much as they can. We'll have to see about his future with the team, but right now he is going to be the core. And I think in the nickel, I think Willie Gay's appearance has probably let Damian Wilson be a backup in terms of the nickel package. Wilson will be the starter in the base over at the Sam is my thought. But in the nickel, I think he will be on the bench for the most part. And I think it's right here is the toss-up. Does Willie Gay get to start right away? I think in the base, he probably doesn't. I think in the base defense, when you have 3 linebackers, it's Hitch, Wilson, and Neiman at the will. And I think that's what they want to do, the experience against the run when they know they have to stop that. But there's just no denying Willie Gay's athleticism and his ability to let them do more things in the nickel defense with his coverage ability. So I do think whether it's week 1 or whether it's week 4, he will be the number 1 will linebacker in this particular iteration. That is one of the nickel packages. And I think Dorian O'Daniel makes it purely based on his special teams. If you missed my video about the curious case of Dorian O'Daniel, this is his last-ditch effort. I think he makes the roster because he plays for special teams, and I think he has a chance, especially week 1 against the Texans, to come on and show something. If he can do that, he might have a future in Kansas City long-term. And that brings us, of course, back to the safeties. Tyrann Mathieu, the leader of this defense, the number 1 athlete to be opposite Patrick Mahomes in terms of 2 sides of the locker room. He will be, and I just put this here as a 2-safety set, Dan Sorensen backing him up because Dan plays well closer to the line of scrimmage in that robber nickel linebacker role, which if they went to a small, you would just see in the small nickel Hitchens and Sorensen where you'd have a 3-safety set. Behind Mathieu will be Juan Thornhill making his comeback, getting ready to make an impression on the league, and I think is in for a bump up in his ability to produce PBUs and possibly interceptions as well. And I think at the end of the day, they're worried about consistency, and I think that leads them to keeping guys that have had experience on other teams, even though they're new to this roster, in Thompson and Colbert, as quality backups that can do multiple roles, but also have the tendency to play deep as the free safety in case there's a hiccup with Juan, or in case they want to get crafty with Juan and move him around a little bit more. Now that brings us back to the two players that are going to be suspended, and those are Mike Pennell down here and Bashaud Breeland. Now, the rigmarole of back and forth on the roster is going to take care of itself. At the end of the day, we won't see Pennell until week 3. We won't see Breeland until week 5. Those will require some changes, and so the back and forth between the practice squad will be a little bit more than we're used to. And those practice squad players will include these guys. And as we line them up, starting at the back behind Mathieu and Sorensen is Armani Watts, a guy that has been with this team, very emotional about winning the Super Bowl, a guy that is bought into the Chiefs as an organization. And I don't think they want to lose him. I think not only because of the COVID rules, but in general, I think he's got a little bit of makeup from his injury still. He's got to improve still. And I do feel that they want him on the roster in some form or fashion. So maybe he starts the year over on the practice squad. And they're able to switch that out. If they decide Thompson or Colbert is not living up, pop Armani right back onto the active roster. This is going to be a lot more fluid season with all the COVID rules and the back and forths of the practice squad. So don't let that bother you about Armani not being on the roster opening day, possibly. I think he'll be back and forth. When you move around, I think it's about warranting a spot. And these are the guys that I think have earned that by making plays in this training camp. Harris, in particular, was really giving O'Daniel a run for the money. It's the special teams that won it for O'Daniel there. Lamons is a guy that we've seen make some plays or heard of making plays in camp, and I think he's right on the heels there of pushing to improve enough to make a roster maybe next season. Then we get to Deverell Lawrence, who's another defensive tackle that I think has showed some promise, and he'll start on the practice squad. He'll likely be there in case of emergency if there's any other injuries to the other four, and I do believe that the change will be Warden going down to the practice squad as Pennell gets elevated post-suspension. And that leaves the two big question marks. This was a tough one for me, but I do think at the end of the day, the versatility of the 10 defensive linemen I left leaves Breeland Speaks out in the cold. But because of the injury, because of lack of playing time, and because of COVID rules, they should be able to get him onto the practice squad if they choose. Now, there's also an option to trade him. I don't know that he's shown you enough or shown enough on film to really garner any value. So I think it's worth the investment in stashing him on the practice squad and allowing him to continue to develop. He's a year behind, so that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think they still have a lot of hope for Tim Ward. I know he batted some balls in training camp, but I don't think he's there yet. He, again, is behind from an injury, and I think they want to have him around and let him develop. And then the guy that I'm hoping develops rather quickly, and maybe by midseason is in a position to push to come up from the practice squad and contribute, is Lavert Hill, a guy that has a natural knack for the ball and showed a lot in college, but he clearly isn't there yet. I think that is coming. And that, my friends, is your 53-man roster as I see it a couple days before the Chiefs actually make their decisions. We'll see how close we get. And either way, I think this is going to be a great season with a lot of quality players here. So thank you for checking this one out. Leave your comments below. Who do you think that is different? Who should make this roster that I don't have on there? Who do you think didn't earn their spot? Let me know down in the comments. If you're not, make sure you sub, like, and hit that bell notification. We will have more for you coming next week, as well as we get ready for the Houston Texans. Thanks for watching this one. I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching this video from the team at RGR Football. Click these videos to see more and subscribe to RGR Football.